The first strange thing I noticed that night was the ambulance. It came down the road way too fast. No siren, no headlights, just the red strobes flashing through the rain. It passed Darden's stop and go without slowing, drifted over the center line, clipped the ditch, and kept going into the darkness like the driver had forgotten that roads had edges. I sat there behind the wheel of my truck and watched the red light vanish between the pine trees. Then I looked back at the store. The cashier behind the counter had seen it too. So had the old man by the coffee machine and the woman in nurse scrubs standing near the medicine aisle. For about 10 seconds, nobody inside Darden's moved. Then, the cashier reached for the television remote. The old man went back to stirring his coffee, and I told myself it was none of my business anyway. I'd come there for one reason, and one reason only: to rob the place. A crashed ambulance was somebody else's problem. That's how I thought back then. Keep your eyes on your own trouble. Let everybody else drown in theirs. It had kept me alive more than once, or maybe it had just kept me mean. I was parked across the road from Darden's stop and go in my old Chevrolet truck, tucked behind a closed bait shop with the engine off and the keys still in my hand. Rain tapped on the roof and ran down the windshield in dirty lines, turning the store lights into yellow streaks. The truck smelled of damp clothes, stale tobacco, and the cheap coffee I'd bought an hour earlier to try to quell the panic in my stomach. On the passenger seat, wrapped in an oily rag, was my father's revolver. On my phone, in the cup holder, was a photograph of my daughter's school gates. The Crow twins had sent it at 9:12 p.m. No message at first, just the picture. Blue gates, wet pavement, the little painted sign out front with the school name on it next to a holly bush. Then, a minute later, a text message with just 2 words. "Sunrise, Travis." That was all. I had read it so many times that the words felt burned into the inside of my eyes. My daughter Abby was 6 years old. She had a missing front tooth, a laugh that came out too loud, and a habit of grabbing my little finger instead of my hand when we crossed the road. She still had some innocent faith in the fact that I was a good man. That was the worst part. Not the debt or the Crow twins, not even the gun. The fact that my daughter still thought I was useful. I owed $4,000 to Mason Crow. My entire net worth was $318 in my wallet, and maybe a grand's worth of truck, if he'd even accept it. There was no version of that night where the till inside Darden's would fix my problem. I knew that before I opened the truck door. I knew it while I watched the cashier behind the counter, young and tired in her red polo shirt. I knew it while the old man sipped his coffee, and the nurse in scrubs stared up at the store television with her arms folded tight across her chest. Still, there was bad math, and then there was no math at all. $200 from the till was still $200 I didn't have to give to Mason Crow right then. And maybe the store had a safe. Maybe the owner kept cash out back, or maybe Mason would take a down payment and give me more time. Men like me live on maybes when the proper roads run out. Inside the store, the television flickered and the cashier turned the volume up. I couldn't hear it from the truck, of course, but I saw the scarlet banner along the bottom of the screen. White letters moved across it too quickly for me to read from where I sat. But the nurse stepped closer, staring intently, her face cracked with concern. I just looked down at the revolver. My father had kept it in the bedside drawer when I was a kid, and only took it out when he was drunk to sit and clean at the kitchen table. Sometimes he would spin the cylinder and smile when the room went quiet, and my mother's shoulders shuddered. I hated that gun. Don't know why I took it when he died. There are things you just inherit before you understand they're poison, I guess. A shape moved near the edge of the gas station canopy, and my head snapped toward the movement. Then the rain shifted, and the shape became a hanging strip of torn plastic from a trash can, twisting in the wind. I was jumpy, for sure. A man about to rob a store should be jumpy. The ambulance was long gone, and the road was empty again. No siren followed it, no police cruiser or headlights from a following relative. Just rain, trees, and Dardens sitting bright on the other side of the road like nothing bad had ever happened under its lights. I pulled a black balaclava down over my beard. The wool smelled damp and sour, my breath condensing against the inside of it straight away. For a few seconds, I just sat there looking through the eye holes at the three people inside the store: the cashier, the old man, the nurse. 3 witnesses. It was too many, but the phone was still glowing in the cup holder. "Sunrise, Travis?" So I rammed the revolver into my coat pocket and opened the door of the truck. Rain hit my face and ran cold down my neck. I crossed the road with my head lowered, boots splashing through shallow water at the edge of the tarmac. Halfway over, I heard a scream in the distance. My head snapped toward the sound, and I stopped for a few seconds. Nothing followed, so I shrugged it off as a coyote or something and kept moving. At the door, I paused. Not for long, but long enough to see my own reflection in the glass. Black mask, wet coat, eyes I barely recognized. I hated what I'd become. Behind the reflection, the cashier was still watching the television. The scarlet banner was larger now, and I caught 2 words before the picture jumped. "Stay inside." Then the screen spat static. I shoved open the door, and the bell gave a tired little jingle as warm air and the smell of coffee, mop water, chicken grease, and wet cardboard hit me. The cashier looked up, and for a split second, her face belonged to an ordinary night. Then she saw the balaclava, and her hand froze halfway toward the remote. The old man turned because she had gone still, and he gasped. The nurse's head snapped toward the noise. I walked to the counter and placed the revolver down beside the scratch cards, keeping my actions fluid and more confident than I felt. "Open the register," I hissed. Nobody spoke, and that suited me just fine. The girl behind the counter stared at the gun, and for a second, she didn't move at all. Then her eyes lifted to mine, wide and wet under the fluorescent lights. Her name tag said Lena, though I barely registered it then. It was pinned crooked to her red polo shirt, just above a little stain of coffee or cola that had dried into the fabric. "Register," I said again. My voice sounded strange through the mask, thicker, meaner, and colder. Lena nodded carefully, and her hand moved toward the till. The old man by the coffee machine shifted his weight, and I lifted the gun toward him just enough for him to understand. "Stop all the movement," I snapped. He froze. The nurse in the medicine aisle had held her hands up in front of her now, and I felt pangs of guilt surge through me as I saw how terrified she looked. I snapped my eyes back to the cashier as the register opened with a clack. "There's not much here," Lena stammered. "Everybody has stayed home. Haven't you seen?" "Shut up," I ordered. "Let me see." I peered over the counter and cursed under my breath as I realized how right she was. There was a handful of 20s, some 5s and 1s, and a small pile of coins in the side compartment. It looked pathetic under the bright lights. My stomach dropped, but I kept the gun steady and feigned confidence. "Bag it, Lena." She reached beneath the counter for a paper bag, and her fingers slipped twice, trying to open it. The sound of the bag crackling seemed a little too loud in the little store. Suddenly, a line of static hissed from the television above the counter. I saw the nurse's head snap up to it in my peripheral vision. I didn't look, though. I was too focused on dollar bills. "Keep going, Lena. You're doing well," I said, trying to make my voice sound cold. Lena started scooping the notes into the bag. Her hands were shaking badly enough that a roll of quarters tipped from the tray and spilled across the counter. Coins bounced, spun, and dropped to the floor. One hit my boot, but I ignored it. A burst of sound tore from the television then. "Avoid contact with anyone showing signs of aggression or disorientation." The picture crackled into static again. Behind me, the nurse made a small noise in her throat. "What did it say?" the old man whispered to her. "Shut it," I hissed, waving the gun in his direction again. Then, something tapped the front window. Not hard, just a small, wet sound squeaking against the glass. I kept my eyes fixed on Lena. I still thought the money mattered most. That's how deep in the hole I was. The world could have literally split open behind me, and I would still have been counting 20s. The tap came again. Lena stopped putting money in the bag, and her eyes flicked past my shoulder. Like someone had hit a switch, all the color drained from her face. I noticed that all right, and spun around, bracing myself for police or some hero being brave. It was neither. A woman stood outside under the canopy lights, close enough that her forehead nearly touched the window. At first glance, she looked injured. Then my eyes started picking out the details in the darkness. Her hair was plastered flat to her skull in long, greasy ropes. One cheek had been torn open from the corner of her mouth almost to her ear, leaving a dark, wet split that moved when her jaw worked. Rainwater ran down her face and turned pink as it passed over her chin. Her yellow blouse was ripped down the front, not cut, ripped, and the fabric hung open over mottled gray skin, and a mess of bite marks clustered around her collarbone. One of her feet was bare, the toes scraped bloody from the concrete. The other foot still had a sandal hanging from it by a broken strap, slapping softly against her heel whenever she shifted her weight. But it was her eyes that made my stomach go cold. They weren't wild. They weren't scared. They were empty in a way that didn't belong on a living person. Clouded over and unfocused, they drifted across the store lights and the shelves and our faces without anything human in them. Her mouth opened and closed, like she was chewing on a word she couldn't remember how to say. Then she lifted 2 fingers and touched the glass. Tap. The nurse moved first. She took a step toward the door, but I swung the revolver back in her direction. "Nobody said move," I warned. "She's hurt," the nurse protested. Her voice sounded different now, less scared of me and more scared of what was going on outside. "That woman is not hurt," I hissed. I didn't know why I jumped to that conclusion. I didn't know what she was, but I knew hurt. I knew drunk. I knew sick and desperate and half dead from bad choices. Whatever stood outside the glass was something else. The woman tapped again, same 2 fingers, same long, squeaking sound. Then a man came running across the forecourt from the direction of the road. He burst into the glow of the canopy lights with one hand pressed against his neck and the other held out in front of him. His shirt was dark from collar to stomach, and rainwater splashed around his shoes as he staggered across the forecourt. He saw the woman at the window and stopped so sharply his feet went out from under him. I could hear him through the glass, not the words, just the panic in them. The woman's head snapped toward him, the sound of bone cracking reverberating up the glass panel. Her jaw hung open for a second, and the torn hand of her cheek stretched wider than it should have. The man backed up, hands out in front of him. Then, a blood-curdling shriek tore from the woman's throat, and she lunged at him. Her body lurched forward, one shoulder dropping, arms flailing. He tried to pull away, but she was moving too fast. She caught him on the forearm and took him down hard next to the fuel pumps. The sound of his head cracking against concrete echoed across the forecourt, and I heard Lena shudder on the other side of the counter. The nurse dropped her basket, and medicine bottles rolled across the tiles. The woman outside climbed on top of her prey and bent her face into his throat. He tried to thrash, but she was too strong. A fountain of crimson erupted from his neck as his legs spasmed wildly. His scream cut into a gargle, then nothing. I just stood there with a gun in my hand and a bag of stolen money half full on the counter, and for a few seconds, every part of me went empty. The television above us spat static again. "Do not approach infected persons." Then the sound cut out. Infected. That word got through, though. The old man started towards the door, but I caught the back of his jacket and yanked him away. He swung round on me, fury in his wrinkled face. "What the hell are you doing?" he spat. "Saving your life." Outside, the woman lifted her face from the man's neck. Her mouth was black and wet, and something stringy hung from her teeth before the rain broke it loose. Her eyes darted back towards the store. This time, she didn't tap. She lurched forward, slamming both hands against the glass, shrieking wildly. The whole pane of glass jumped in its frame. Lena backed into the cigarette shelf, knocking cartons to the floor with a clatter that made me jump. Then the woman hit the glass again, harder this time. A white crack spidered out above the lottery poster and ran upward like lightning. Suddenly, the man on the ground moved. His back arched with a crack we heard inside, and his head snapped sideways as he pushed himself up from the asphalt with jerked, jagged movements. Half his throat was missing. There was no question of that now. Even through the rain, I could see the torn red hollow under his jaw. He should have been dead, but instead, he stood. Sort of. He clambered up with the balance of an infant finding its feet for the first time. Lena made a small sound, worse than a scream, and the nurse whispered, "No!" The man outside turned toward the window too and began to stagger toward the glass as the woman hit it again. The crack spread out even wider. "It won't hold," the old man whispered next to me. Lena suddenly dropped under the counter. For a second, I thought she was hiding. Then I heard her hand slap against something under the till. "There's a shutter," she gasped, eyes flitting between me and the infected outside. "Then close it, fast." "I'm trying," she whimpered. The woman outside drove her shoulder into the pane again. This time, the glass gave. Not the whole window, just a jagged hole around her arm and part of her face. Glass shards exploded inward, pelting across the floor, and rain blew in with her. The torn side of her cheek scraped along the broken glass, ripping the flesh wider, but she didn't react. She only reached inside, fingers grasping in the empty air. The nurse grabbed a metal display stand from the end of the medicine aisle. Phone chargers and cheap earbuds scattered onto the floor as she drove it forward. The old man helped her without even being told. They shoved it up against the broken glass, barricading the pane at chest height. But the woman's arm was already through, clawing past the metal shelving. I leveled the gun and pulled the trigger. The round exploded through the air inside the shop, the crack of the bullet reverberating off the walls and making my ears ring. The shot punched straight through the side of the woman's skull. Brain fragments sprayed up the outside of the glass as she crumpled from the window and disappeared under the frame. I stood wide as smoke curled from the barrel. Lena had her hands covering her ears. For a second, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then the woman appeared again, dragging herself up using the window ledge as a support. I fired again. This time, the bullet hit true. It carved a tunnel straight between the woman's eyes. Her head snapped sideways as she let out another gargled shriek, and then she dropped hard onto the concrete. Behind her, the man with the ruined throat reached the door, but Lena had found the shutter switch. A motor coughed somewhere above the window, and a metal shutter began to rumble down from the ceiling. Slow, too slow. The man outside pulled the door handle, and it opened, just a few inches before the doormat bunched underneath it. But that was enough. Cold rain gusted into the store, and the smell came with it. Blood, wet clothing, the sour rot of ammonia. The nurse shoved the display stand toward the gap, and the old man threw his shoulder behind it. I moved too without even thinking, and slammed my size 12 against the back of the door. The man's fingers had curled around the frame now, though, and he shoved his face into the gap as his broken nails scraped glass. His jaw snapped open and closed, bloody sputum erupting from his rotten mouth. Thinking fast, I hit him hard with the butt of the revolver. Once, twice. His nose broke flat against his face with a crack, but it didn't slow him down. The shutter had reached halfway, but more shapes were appearing behind him in the rain. One by the ice machine, another near pump 2, a third crawling from the road on its elbows. Lena was hitting the button under the counter again and again. "Come on," she sobbed. Come on, please God." The man in the doorway lunged forward, and his teeth caught the sleeve of my coat. I felt the ripping before I even understood what happened. Then I ripped back my arm, leaving a long strip of fabric dangling from his teeth. I shoved the barrel of the revolver against his forehead and fired. His head snapped back, and he dropped in the threshold, trapped half through the door. The shutter was close now, and the body was squarely in the way. The old man swore and kicked at the corpse, trying to shove it out of the way before the metal curtain jammed. The nurse used the display stand like a ram. I grabbed the other side. "Push!" I shouted. Together, we drove the edge of the stand into the body and shoved him just far enough across the threshold to slam the door closed. The shutter passed down over the door and hit the floor with a heavy bang. I breathed for a second. Then something hit the other side hard. Once, then again. Then 3, 4, 5 impacts so close that the metal trembled in its runners. The old man stepped back from the metal, and the nurse looked at me, then at the gun. "Tell me you brought spares," she gasped, nodding at the cylinder. I shook my head. "I wasn't even going to use it," I grimaced. 3 rounds left." "Jesus Christ," the nurse cried. "You idiot!" The bag of money still lay on the counter where Lena had dropped it. Some of the bills had spilled out, and 120 had landed in the puddle, spreading from the shattered window. I just stared at it for a few seconds. I'd only come in for that. I'd scared a young girl half to death for that. Now there were dead people hurling themselves at the shutter outside, and the money looked smaller and more pointless than anything I'd ever seen. Lena rose slowly from behind the counter, face wet and pale. She had black streaks on her cheeks where her mascara had run from sobbing eyes. She pointed a short, shaking finger right at me. "You brought them in," she quivered. I looked at her, shaking my head. "No, I had no idea." "You opened the door," she hissed. The shutter shook again, harder this time. The old man picked up another one of the metal displays and wedged it against the inside of the shutter, behind the door. The nurse moved beside him to help. "We can argue after it holds," she grimaced. That was the first sensible thing anyone had said since I walked in. I slipped the revolver back into my pocket, grabbed the nearest shelf, and shoved it toward the front of the store. The shelf scraped across the tiles with a metallic shriek that cut straight through my teeth. Lena flinched, but she rushed round the counter to help. She grabbed the other side of the shelf and helped me push it, her skinny arms shaking as we positioned it against the shutter. For a second, we looked at each other over the top of the metal frame. Her eyes were red and puffed, and her mouth trembled like she was trying to decide whether to scream at me again or help me. "Push!" she gasped. So we pushed. The shelf hit the shutter hard enough to make the whole thing rattle. Something struck the other side almost immediately, and Lena let out a short, sharp breath, but kept both hands pressed against the display. The nurse dragged over a crate of bottled water and dropped it against the base. Then another. Meanwhile, the old man limped toward the end of the aisle and dragged over a display of windshield washer fluid, grunting as it tilted toward him. "Help me with this," he barked. I went over and took the weight off him. He smelled of coffee and rain and tobacco. Up close, he looked older than I'd first thought, but far from weak. There was a hard line to his jaw and a mean little spark in his eyes. "You got a name?" he asked me. I thought for a moment. Then I sighed and yanked the balaclava from over my head, breathing deeply as fresh air hit my skin. "Travis," I grunted. "You, Travis, are a fucking idiot," he scolded. "But I'm Earl." Then he nodded toward the counter. "That girl you had your gun on is Lena Darden, my brother's niece. This is his store." That landed somewhere in my stomach, putting a full name to the person I'd driven to tears. "I didn't know that," I muttered. "Would it have stopped you?" Earl snorted. I didn't answer. Earl shook his head in disbelief and shoved the rack with his shoulder. "Didn't think so," he murmured. Together, we rammed the display against the shutter. Plastic containers rattled in their slots, and blue liquid leaked from one which had split, running over the floor and mixing with rainwater, blood, and the bills scattered near the counter. The nurse was gathering the money, and for a second, I thought she was taking it. Then she threw it behind the counter, out of the puddle, like she couldn't stand looking at it. "I'm Marcy," she said, without turning round. "Belle, before you ask." "I wasn't going to," I said. "No," she hissed. "Men with guns are typically so polite." Lena made a small sound. It might have been a laugh if anything in that room had still been funny. Then the shutter jumped again, and all four of us dropped silent. Something scraped along the outside of the shutter, like nails on a chalkboard. Earl's eyes shot to the display rack, then to the shutter, then to the broken window, now hidden behind both. "That won't hold long if they keep piling against it," he muttered. "How do you know?" I asked. "Because I'm not stupid," he hissed. That was fair enough. Behind me, Marcy was wiping the rain and sweat from her face with the back of her wrist. There was blood on her sleeve, but I didn't think it was hers. She put her hair up into a tight bun, all business. "We check bites first," she ordered, jerking her finger toward the outside. "Clearly, whatever this is, it spreads through bites." Nobody moved for a second. "Now!" she barked. The word came out like a nurse's order, not a request. She checked Lena first. Hands, wrists, forearms, neck. Lena stood there letting it happen, staring at the shutter like it might burst open if she blinked. There were red marks on her arm where she'd backed into the display, but she was clean otherwise. Marcy checked Earl next, but he lifted both arms and scowled. "I'd know if I'd been bitten," he protested. "You'd be surprised what people don't notice when they're scared," Marcy explained. Earl's face bunched up. "I'm not scared." Marcy just looked at him, so he sighed and let her check. He was clean too. Then she turned on me. I almost told her no. I didn't like people touching me unless they had to, but she was already locked onto the torn sleeve of my coat. "Arm," she ordered. "It didn't get me," I hissed. "Arm." I pulled the coat off enough to show her. The fabric was ripped from elbow to wrist where the dead man's teeth had caught it. Underneath, my skin was red, but whole. Marcy ran her cold fingers up my forearm, checking me anyway. "You're good," she said after a few seconds. I knew I was, but a strange tingle of relief rushed through my body, and I smiled a small smile. "Don't mistake that for approval," Marcy scolded. "I won't." Another hit rattled the shutter, and this one was heavier. The top shelf rattled loose, and a row of candy bars slid off the shelf behind us. Lena jumped, then bent and picked up a metal broom handle from the floor, brandishing it across her chest with both hands. "I can't die here," she whimpered. Nobody answered. Lena looked at Earl. "Uncle Ray keeps tools in the office, right? And chains?" Earl nodded. "And in the stockroom," he said. I looked toward the back of the store. Past the aisles, past the beer coolers and restroom door, there was a gray metal door marked "Employees Only." "How many doors are back there?" I asked. Lena swallowed, her face scrunching in thought before she spoke. "Delivery door, office door, roof hatch." "Windows?" I pressed. "Bathroom has one, but it's small," she said. "How small?" She grimaced. "Not small enough." That was all I needed to hear. I picked up the fallen display and shoved it back into place, hard. Then I turned to Earl. "You and Lena keep stacking weight here. Anything heavy. Low first, then higher. And don't just pile it, wedge it." Earl's eyebrows lifted. "You giving orders now?" he snorted. "No," I hissed. "I'm trying not to get eaten." Earl nodded once and set about reinforcing the barricade. Marcy grabbed her basket from the floor and upturned the contents into a plastic shopping bag. "You're not going back there alone," she said, stepping toward me. "I've got the gun," I said, pointing at my pocket. She rolled her eyes. "Yeah, with 3 bullets and shitty judgment." She picked up a box cutter from behind the counter, snapped the blade out, and stepped past me before I could argue. The stockroom smelled of cardboard, bleach, and stale beer. The lighting from the shop only reached halfway in, and the bulb above was dead, leaving the back of the stockroom cloaked in shadows. Boxes were stacked against both walls: beer crates, dog food, toilet rolls. A broken sandwich board lay on the floor, and a cracked chest freezer hummed by the far wall. The delivery door was at the end, metal, push bar, no window. It was closed tight, but that didn't make me feel any better. Marcy stayed beside me, box cutter held low. She'd stopped shaking now, or maybe she'd just pushed it somewhere deeper inside her. "You got someone out there?" I asked her. She nodded. "My son." I kept looking at the delivery door, but the family connection made fresh pangs of guilt well up inside me. "How old?" I asked. She screwed up her face. 11, she said. "Noah. He's home with a fever. My neighbor was meant to check in, but I don't know if she did. I don't know if anyone is answering phones. Mine's still in the car outside." A soft scrape against the delivery door made both of our heads snap upward. Marcy stopped talking, and I lifted the revolver. The scrape came again, soft but certain. Something was definitely moving outside. I stepped quietly up to the metal and pressed my ear against it, listening carefully. Rain. Breathing. Or maybe I imagined the breathing. Then the push bar shifted, just a little. Marcy saw it too, and her eyes widened in fear. I threw my shoulder against the door as the bar dipped again. "Get something heavy, now." Marcy grabbed the nearest beer crate and shoved it at my feet, then another. I kicked them against the base of the door while keeping my shoulder rammed against the metal. Something hit the door from outside, and the force drove through my shoulder and into my spine. "We need more," I shouted. Marcy wrapped her arms around the chest freezer, ripping the cord from the wall as she pushed with all her might. It screamed against the concrete, but her fear did half the lifting. I lifted off the door just long enough to help her ram it underneath the push bar. The door bucked and the freezer shifted an inch. "Lena!" Marcy screamed. Footsteps slapped behind us, and Lena appeared with a coil of chain over her shoulder, and Earl close behind her, carrying a toolbox. "What is it?" Lena asked. I jerked my thumb toward the stock door. "Company," I grunted. The word came out too calm, and I didn't like it. Then another impact hit the door. Earl dropped the toolbox and helped Lena loop the chain around the push bar and through the metal shelving beside it. Her hands were still shaking, but she worked fast, threading and pulling, lips moving silently as if she was counting. Something outside dragged its nails down the metal. The sound made my skin crawl. Earl wedged a crowbar through the chain links and twisted until it tightened. Marcy piled more stock crates against the freezer. Another hit reverberated against the door, then another. The door held for now. Lena stepped back from the chain, admiring her work for a second. Then her head flitted toward the ceiling. "There's a roof hatch," she said, looking upward. A square panel sat above a fixed ladder near the freezer, and rain tapped somewhere above it. "Where does it come out?" I asked. "It's just for access to the air conditioner," Lena said. "There's no ladder down or anything." Earl wiped his mouth and continued for her. "There's a drainage ditch behind the store," he said. "Runs past the fence line and cuts toward Meadow Acres." Marcy looked at him sharply. "Meadow Acres?" she said. Earl nodded. "Yeah, there's a trailer park and a back road beyond it." "I live in Meadow Acres," Marcy said. I saw it happen in her face. The decision, the danger of hope. "No chance," I said, shaking my head. She turned on me. "You don't even know what I'm thinking." "Yeah, I do," I said. "You're thinking roof, ditch, home." "My son is alone," she hissed. "And there are 30 of those things outside," I snapped. "You won't make it 20 feet." "You don't know that," she retorted. For a second, the fury in her face made me think she was about to lunge at me with the box cutter. Then, the front shutter boomed, so loud it seemed to shake the entire building. Lena spun toward the shop. A second boom followed, then a long metallic groan. The crowd had found the front again. We all rushed back onto the shop floor. The barricade had shifted now, not much, but enough for concern. The display rack had slid sideways, and the base of the shutter was bowed inward, where something heavy had hit it from outside. Gray fingers pushed through a narrow gap at the bottom, clawing at the air. Earl grabbed the rack and pushed. Marcy helped him. I looked at the gap, then at the money still scattered around the till, then at the gun in my hand. The fingers kept reaching under the gap. I lifted my boot and brought it down hard, bone cracking as I ground it under my heel. The hands vanished and something outside screamed, not in pain, but in cold rage. The shutter buckled again. "More weight!" I shouted. Lena ran to the drink coolers and started pulling crates free, and Marcy shoved the coffee station up against the shutter, coffee spilling black across the floor. Earl dragged another shelf across the aisle, swearing with every step. I moved with them. Nobody asked me to, nobody thanked me, but I did it anyway. We stacked the store against the dead. Crates at the bottom, shelves angled behind them, the freezer from the ice machine wedged against the center. Every inch of barricade we added seemed too small, every hit from outside louder than the last. When we finally stopped, none of us were standing straight. Lena had both hands on her knees. Earl was leaning against the cigarette counter. Marcy had one palm pressed to her chest, breathing hard and looking toward the back like her son might appear if she stared long enough. I snatched the broom handle Lena had dropped from the floor. The butcher knife from the hot food counter glinted under the shop lights, and I found a roll of duct tape behind the counter. Lena watched me tape the knife to the handle, wrapping it tight until the blade stopped wobbling. "What are you doing?" she asked frantically. I looked at her. "Making your broom less useless." She stared at it when I held it out to her. Then she took it. Her fingers brushed mine, and she recoiled like I'd given her an electric shock. Fair enough, I thought. Suddenly, the television flickered back into life above us. Our heads snapped upward in time to see a reporter standing in heavy rain outside a hospital, shouting into a microphone while people bolted across the screen behind him. The red banner now read, "Federal emergency alert, hospitals overwhelmed, quarantine in place." Then the camera dropped and the screen filled with asphalt. A shadow ran across it, and the broadcast cut to color bars, then black. We all looked at each other in silence, truth setting in at last. Outside, the dead kept hitting the shutter. Slower now, not weaker, just with more patience. Marcy broke the tense silence. "We can't stay here, guys." Earl gave a tired laugh. "Lady, I don't think we have many options." "We need a plan," Marcy snapped. "We've got a plan," Lena whimpered. "Keep the door shut and keep quiet." "That's not a plan," Marcy scowled, pointing at the television. "That's waiting and praying. It hardly looks like anyone is coming to help, does it?" I looked toward the stockroom before speaking. "She's right," I said. Everyone turned to look at me. I hated that, but I nodded toward the back room. Right now, the front is drawing most of them because of the lights. If we kill the outside lights, the crowd might thin. We waited out until they disperse, then use the hatch. We drop onto the dumpster out back. Fence, ditch, meadow acres. Earl stared at me for a few seconds, weighing up my face. "You thought of that quick," he scoffed. I grimaced. "I've spent a lot of my life thinking about exits." Lena hugged the spear close to her chest. "What if it's not clear?" she whispered. I held the revolver up and gave the cylinder a spin. "Then we fight," I said, coldly. Nobody liked that answer, and truth be told, I didn't like it much either. The revolver looked pathetic in my hand now. 3 rounds, 4 people. God knows how many dead things hoarding outside. It was the kind of math even I could understand. Lena looked at the shutter, then back at me. "You say fight like it means something," she whimpered. "Fight with what?" I waved my arm around the store before speaking. "With all this." That sounded stupid until we started doing it. Earl found a box of road flares under the counter and a first aid kit by the door. Marcy grabbed bleach, rubbing alcohol, bandages, scissors, and every roll of tape she could find. Lena knew where her uncle kept the tools, and within 2 minutes she had a hammer, 2 screwdrivers, a tire iron, and a nail gun with half a strip left in it. Well, we took apart everything that wasn't nailed down. Then we took apart some things that were. Shelves became braces, Mop handles became spears. Earl smashed the lock off the propane cage through the side service hatch and dragged 3 small cylinders inside, cursing under his breath the whole way. "There goes my back," he whined. But I knew the old man was scared. I could see it in the sharpness of him. Every word came out through gritted teeth, but his hands still worked, and right then, that counted. The lights over the pump still burned outside, throwing their yellow glow through the edges of the shutter and under the gaps. I could hear the movement out there, and it wasn't just hitting now. Moaning, scraping, feet dragging through puddles. Every so often one of them screamed, and others answered from further down the road. The sound made the outside feel bigger and emptier than it had any right to be. Lena found the breaker panel in the office. "If I kill the front lights, the front cameras will go out too," she explained. "Do we need cameras?" Earl asked, raising an eyebrow. "We need to know what's behind the store," Marcy insisted. Lena looked at me. I hated that she did that, like somehow I had been bestowed the deciding vote. "Leave the rear camera," I said. "Kill the lights on the canopy and sign." Lena nodded and headed back into the office to flip 2 breakers. The front of the store went darker at once, the orange seep disappearing into nothingness as the canopy lights died, one after the other. The sign by the road flickered. Darden's Stop and Go became Darden's Stop and Gone. The reaction was immediate. The dead outside changed. Their shuffling feet didn't dissipate, but the hammering at the front lost its rhythm, and the pressure on the metal shutter eased with a thankful groan. Marcy stepped behind the cashier counter and looked down at a small, grainy monitor. The display split into 4 black boxes. The front was dead now, just a small clock ticking in the corner, but the rear display showed the back lane. For a second, it looked empty. Then, something moved behind the dumpster. A figure crawled out from behind it on its stomach, dragging both legs uselessly behind. Its head jerked toward the camera as if it heard us looking. "Oh God," Lena whispered. More shapes drifted into the feed, one after another. They hadn't gone away, they'd spread out. Earl rubbed one hand against his forehead. "The ditch won't help us if they're already back there," he said. Marcy turned back from the monitor. "There has to be another way," she muttered. "There isn't," Lena replied, shaking her head. "Front, back, roof, that's it." "What about the bathroom window?" Marcy asked. "No, it's too small." Marcy cocked her head. "For you, maybe," she said. Lena just stared at her. "You can't be serious." "I am serious," hissed Marcy. "My son is alone out there." Earl shook his head. "No," he shouted. "If you open anything, they'll get in here." "What if it was your son?" spat Marcy. Earl didn't answer. Behind us, the delivery door boomed in the stockroom again, hard enough that we all felt it through the floor. Then once more. I glanced at the monitor and saw stacks of bodies pressed against it, drawn by the sound or the smell or some dead animal instinct that I didn't understand. The chain on the push bar held, but the shelf beside it shifted back half an inch. Lena saw it on the monitor. "The shelving," she gasped. "It's bending." We looked at each other for a second, then dashed back into the stockroom. The chain was still tight across the push bar, but the metal shelving it was wrapped around had started to twist away from the wall. Another impact hit, and the top bolts of the door popped loose. The whole shelving unit jumped forward. Lena screamed and rushed to hold it, but Earl yanked her back just as the door bucked again. "Don't get too close," he shouted. The freezer shifted, and a small gap appeared as the metal bent inwards. Gray fingers appeared in the hole, clawing at the air. I ripped the gun out and fired once through the gap. The hand snapped back and vanished, but I now only had 2 rounds left. The shot was a mistake. It brought everything straight at us. The delivery door groaned under the sudden weight of even more bodies. "It's going to give!" Earl shouted. I shoved my shoulder into the freezer, digging in with my boots. Marcy joined me. Lena grabbed the chain and pulled with both hands. crying out as the metal cut into her palms and blood dripped onto the floor. Earl drove the crowbar through the links again and twisted until his face went red. The gap widened regardless, and I saw a face appear in it. I aimed the revolver, but Marcy caught my arm. "You've only got 2 left," she hissed, her face screwed up under the strain. She was right. I hated that she was right. Earl kicked the freezer toward the door with everything that he had, and for a second, the gap closed on the face. There was a wet crunch, and the thing dropped away outside. The chain held, but the shelving did not. The whole rack burst free from the wall and crashed down beside Lena, missing her by inches. Boxes burst open across the floor, cans rattled, and toilet rolls bounced. For half a second, the push bar dipped, the chain going slack. "Lena!" I shouted. "Nail gun!" She scrambled over the boxes, grabbed it from the floor, and tossed it to me. I fired nails through the metal bracket in the doorframe until the strip ran dry. It wouldn't hold forever, but it might buy us 10 minutes. Marcy's eyes shot up to the roof hatch. "There's no more time!" she cried. "We've got to move!" Nobody argued, not even me. The plan became simple because there were no other options. That was the truth. Lena would go first and open the hatch because she was young and fast. Earl would go next because he was old and slowest. Marcy after him, then I would bring up the rear with the gun. Lena looked at me as I said it, concern across her face. "Why last?" she said. I glanced at the door. "Someone has to," I grimaced, "and I probably owe you guys one." She understood then. Not forgiving me, but something past her face that wasn't hatred. The ladder shook as Lena climbed, her palms leaving blood on the rungs where the chain had torn through her flesh. She shoved the hatch open, and rain fell straight through in a cold, wet sheet. "Lena, go!" I shouted. She vanished onto the roof before I could look twice. Earl climbed next, grunting with every step. Halfway up, his bad knee locked, and for one awful second, he just froze there. I put my hand on the small of his back and pushed as hard as I could manage. That got him moving. The delivery door hit again behind us, and the freezer bucked back another inch. Marcy put one foot on the ladder, then stopped and looked at me. "My son's name is Noah," she said suddenly. I nodded, but she shook her head. "No," she continued. "We live at 38 Ashley Avenue. If I don't make it..." She looked pleadingly at me, and I understood. "You're making it," I nodded. "You don't know that," she cried. She was shaking now. "No," I said, "but I know I'm done making things worse. I'm here to help." She stared at me for another half a second, then sucked in a deep breath and climbed. The door bucked again, and the crowbar hit the floor with a clatter. The push bar dipped, and I saw fingers and faces in the gap. The metal howled as the door bent inwards. From above, Marcy screamed my name. I backed toward the ladder fast, revolver raised, one round in the gun, one spare in the cylinder. The first dead thing forced its body through the gap as the door gave way. I fired. Its skull kicked back as red mist exploded around the room. It slumped over the freezer and vanished. One round left. The door opened wider, and more bodies appeared in the gap. I climbed 3 rungs on the ladder. Then the hardest thought echoed through my head. The paper bag of money was still barely visible from here, behind the counter, half open, damp bills stuck together under the shop lights. I thought of Mason Crow, of Abby's school gates. I thought of the man I'd been an hour earlier, sitting in the truck and telling myself that a robbery was just another bad thing in a life already full of them. Then I looked at the hatch above me, at Lena, Earl, and Marcy waiting in the rain. For me. For a second, I just froze. Then the delivery door exploded off its hinges behind me, and shrieking bodies poured into the stockroom, crawling over the freezer and dragging themselves forward with broken fingers. I climbed, fast. A hand caught my boot, and I kicked down hard, feeling teeth scrape the sole. Marcy grabbed my coat from above, Lena my wrist. Earl swore at all of us and pulled like he was 30 years younger. They dragged me through the hatch and slammed it down just as something hit the underside. We lay on the roof, all four of us breathing like animals. Below us, Darden's stop and go shook as the dead poured into the stockroom. Beyond the tree line, meadow acres burned in little orange pieces through the trees. Marcy crawled to the parapet and looked toward the glow. Lena sat with the spear across her knees, staring at nothing. Earl leaned back against the air conditioner and closed his eyes. And me? I checked the revolver, and the single round I had left to save us all. I had come to Darden's looking for money. I left the money on the floor. Mason Crow could have it if he wanted. For the first time all night, I knew exactly what I owed. Not $4,000. Not anymore. I owed a little girl a father who tried to get back to her. I owed 3 people on the roof the chance to see another morning. So I tucked the gun back into my pocket, wiped the rain from my face, and looked down at the ditch behind the store. "All right," I said. "We head for the ditch as soon as the back of the store clears out." Nobody argued, and so we waited. Below us, the dead kept clawing at the hatch. Above us, the rain came down ever harder. And for once in my life, I stayed exactly where I was needed. And that's where we'll leave my story for now, trapped on the roof with Lena, Earl, and Marcy, praying to God that the horde below disperses enough that we can flee the store. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. It genuinely helps me keep writing these stories for you. And if you'd like a part 2, let me know in the comments, or just let me know where you're surviving from. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Until next time, dear listener.